And after all these years, honest answer, are you happy with where the space is today?
I am happier than I could have ever imagined at the insane progress that our industry has made.
Hi, my name is Luis and I am the co-founder and COO of IDOS. Today, I am in Dubai with a good friend of us and a true Web3 identity OG, Evin McMullen, co-founder at Billions and Privado ID. As early as 2017, Evin was already building on the identity space at Consensus, to later on become the founder of Disco XYZ, and finally, build Billions last year. As she says, Evin is on a mission to save the internet with billions, to help people reclaim their identity on the internet and build networks around humans. Evin, thank you very much for being here today. We have known each other now for several years, I think. We have both been in identity as well for a while in Web3, you a little bit longer than me. But yeah, very happy to be here with you today and thank you for coming. How are you?
I am outstanding. It's another beautiful day on chain. Always a pleasure to have the opportunity to hang out with you.
Thank you for coming. So let's just start a little bit with the background. So you actually have been in identity and Web3, I would say since 2017-18, I believe, that you joined Consensus, something around that. So what first pulled you into digital identity and Web3? And how did your specific background influence that?
My lore actually starts a little bit before then.
Oh, wow.
When I was an undergrad, a student, I had an amazing computer science professor who introduced us to decentralized networks and Bitcoin. And so I guess you could say I started exploring in the crypto space and sort of decentralized identity space before we called it crypto and Web3. So this was now over 10 years ago. But I started working full-time on chain in 2017 with Consensus.
And what did you do after Consensus?
So after spending several years helping to build out the identity practice, bringing crypto technologies to governments, to enterprises around the world, I realized that there was one specific problem that we needed to solve that I didn't think was getting enough focus. And the core of that problem is that if the only thing I know about you is your public key, we can only play two games together. We can do over-collateralized lending, and we can spend a treasury. We can allocate capital or allocate tokens. But for just about every other coordination game, we need to know more about one another. If we wanted to plan a party or schedule a conversation like this, build a product, I need to know where you are. You need to know what language I speak. I need to know what skill sets you have. And that means we need to be able to prove or represent more about ourselves than just the tokens that are mapped to our addresses. You know, and if you've ever seen the movie Fight Club, I think a lot about
Definitely.
the line that you are more than the contents of your wallet, right? And that means from a data perspective, you need to be able to represent more about yourself than just the capital that you have access to, the token assets that you control. And so it was solving that specific problem. How do we prove traits, capabilities, preferences, information about ourselves in the decentralized world when we may not necessarily have met our counterparties before?
And after all these years, honest answer, are you happy with where the space is today?
I am happier than I could have ever imagined at the insane progress that our industry has made. You know, when I first started working, full time in these challenges, it would take you about 30 minutes sitting in front of a computer, crossing your fingers and praying to generate a zero knowledge proof, which is basically like a mathematical output where you could prove something about data, such as prove that you're over 18 without revealing what your birthday is or the underlying information. Very cool technology, but at the time it was very early, very nascent. And today, thanks to the awesome efforts of some of my teammates and others, you can do that very same process in less than a couple seconds on your phone while you're walking down the street. So as far as progress and the underlying technologies that make decentralized identity possible, we are light years ahead of where we were when I first started focusing on this full time.
Yeah, very interesting. Before we get deeper on that, let's get a little bit, maybe I would say philosophical. What is identity in a digital context? And why does identity need to be decentralized?
So in a very literal sense, I think of identity as an identifier, a name that you go by, right? It could be an Ethereum public key, it could be your government name, it could be a nickname, plus data that describes that name. So if the identifier is your passport number, the data that describes it could be the information inside of your passport about you, plus the locations where you visited with that document. If your identifier is an Ethereum public key, the metadata there might be your token holdings or the signatures that you've created. And so, yeah, I think of identity as a name plus what that name has been up to.
And why does that need to be decentralized?
So right now, one of the strange things about identity is that the data that describes us, that's written about us, that's largely created by us, is not controlled by us. And so in much of digital space, your identity is a series of rumors that parties you don't know are spreading behind your back.
I love your analogies.
That is just bizarre. The logical point of centralization for your data is you. And I believe that the atomic unit of a blockchain is a human being. And so those human beings can and should be the transport layer for their own information from an efficiency and logic perspective, but from a control perspective, should absolutely be in the driver's seat when it comes to introducing themselves to the world.
Today, our legal identity is issued by governments. Do you see that changing in the near term? And how might these alternatives to government IDs interoperate rather than collide?
So I think it is unlikely that governments will stop keeping lists of who the citizens in their country are. In fact, as far as a government is concerned, that seems to be one of their primary goals, is to identify, understand, and provide services and capabilities to their citizens. However, I think the traditional sense of government identity has to evolve and is already evolving right before our eyes. So as we become a more global society, as there are more sources of trust and parties like institutions that can provide useful information about us, or even local organizations or community groups, I think that the idea of identity as something that is exclusively controlled by a single government will transform into a variety of different sources of information. And also, I would say, just on a personal level, I come from a family of refugees. There were various points in history when the government that was in charge of keeping a list of all the citizens was no longer in charge. And so when that list is no longer maintained by the same party, when the government documents like birth certificates are no longer available to the people who they describe because they've been destroyed, it doesn't mean those people cease to have identities. It means that they need to rely on other ways to prove who they are.
Mm-hmm. There is a common idea that people repeat sometimes in Web3, which I think is wrong, and probably it goes around what you just mentioned now, which is if someone is to solve identity, will be the governments. And I agree with what you have said, which is like, yes, they definitely need to take some of those parts because it's one of the key roles of governments. But what are ways that, let's call it private, decentralized solutions can interoperate with the government solutions to make it better, privacy preserving, secure?
So back in the 1970s, before I was born, all right, I'm not going to age myself that much, but back in the 1970s, a technology called PGP, or Pretty Good Privacy, was created. It was one of the early methods of public key cryptography that allowed any person anywhere to create an identifier. and to control a private key to sign messages so they could prove that those messages came from themselves, from that particular individual. Now, PGP didn't really succeed for a number of reasons, partly because there was no financial incentive to manage your private keys. But that is where Bitcoin succeeded when this prior technology failed. And I think that incentive of being able to create a sustaining system where individuals can permissionlessly represent themselves, that has led to a whole host of technologies now leveraged by governments in the identity space today. One of those is a zero-knowledge proof. So we talked a little bit earlier about the ability to prove things about yourself without revealing the underlying data. Today, in fact, even just last week, governments around the world have started to engage with this technology as a way to add new superpowers to the identities that they already have. So, for example, the United States Treasury Department issued a request for information and comment asking for guidance on which technologies can be both secure for citizens as well as preventing fraud and enhancing the experience of using digital payments. And so I definitely think that when it comes to the security and scalability of citizen identity, especially as it relates to digital finance, that we're going to see a lot of overlap in between government entities and these frontier technologies.
I hope, and I think it's the only way to solve that, and very happy to see governments that are actually open to exploring these and working with that. I mean, in Europe, the situation is a little bit different. It has been a longer time that they are developing solutions for identity. I don't know if you were personally involved with any of that, but we were for a bit. So there's some progress, and now I think that it's also opening up more, seeing what's happening in other places of the world. But now I will give you actually the ability to design the perfect identity system. So let's say that it comes to you, like there's no government, you're the secretary in charge of coming up with that. What would be key features that are non-negotiable that you could build into an identity system? Maybe let's narrow it down to biometrics. So a biometric identity system, what should it have?
Well, I can tell you what it shouldn't have. It shouldn't have a single private company that controls the definition of who is real, who is a citizen, who is a person. Rather, I think we can look to a set of best practices that actually came out of Microsoft over a decade ago called the 7 Laws of Identity. So this gentleman, Kim Cameron, who was the chief identity architect, I believe, at the time, set forth a series of best practices to minimize risk and harm to human beings when you're building an identity system. Now, I won't go through all of them right now, but my personal favorites are minimum disclosure, rather, meaning that your data should be shared on a need-to-know basis. There is no reason to overshare or over-disclose intimate information about yourself when only a limited amount of data is required to get the job done. Another that I think is really important here is user consent and control. So enabling individuals to decide how much they want to share and with whom, making it easier to mirror the way that we actually exist in real life, and enabling a layer of participation from individuals instead of harvesting data from them, creating secondary markets without their consent and participation, and enabling a series of interactions that maybe they did not plan to have or actively did not want to have. And this also is really important when it comes to maintaining the safety of individuals. We know that doxing people, that publishing information about them can in fact be dangerous. So for example, revealing the data about ethnic minorities in certain environments can be physically harmful, physically dangerous to them. We know that revealing someone's location to parties who they don't know could end up in a pretty bad situation. And so those are definitely crucial aspects, I think, to any well-designed identity system.
And I guess another thing that we need to do is think about the use cases of that identity system, right? So what do we want to solve? You mentioned yourself, identity is many things. Identity is your public key, your ENS domain. Might be as well for compliance. It could be KYC. It could be many things. It could be ZK proof. Where do you position Billions today? What the specific problems do you see yourself solving in the next years?
So Billions Network is the first universal human and AI network built with mobile-first verification. So what that means is that Billions is not made of technology. Billions Network is made of people and the agents who serve them. And so what this means for us is that implementing identity technology in action, in service of proving who you are without revealing the underlying information that makes you you. Being able to do so from the comfort of your own device, not relying on some creepy piece of hardware or some foreign system that requires physical proximity or abundant trust in a totally unknown counterparty. That accessibility, inclusion, scalability puts us, I think, as sort of a universally accessible layer of trust for the internet.
And to be more specific, over the next few years, which identity use cases you feel that are both high impact, but at the same time, realistically solvable?
So already right now, we work with protocol teams and teams in the crypto space to help them filter out bots and Sybils. A Sybil account is basically like a duplicate address or an address or party who is deliberately trying to deceive the application or service that they're interacting with to represent that they are more than one individual, or they are deliberately trying to alter the dynamics of the environment by misrepresenting their identity. And so rather than having to deal with armies of bots, instead these projects can focus on serving their real individual human users. So that's sort of more on the practical crypto side immediately right now, what we are already scaling with many of our partners. But as you know, there are many different potential use cases and scales of these tools, including enterprise and government. So the long tail of adoption for government systems can take years. And as we know, having both of us done work with the European Commission, it can take many years. And so that's why in parallel to these fast-growing frontier technologies, we are also implementing Billions Network with our partners around the world at a slower, more methodical pace, bringing solutions such as fraud prevention to the Ministry of Labor in India, bringing a greater level of security to government identity systems around the world.
Mm-hmm. No, very exciting, and looking forward to see what happens in the next 2 years. I think that finally we have I'm not going to pronounce it properly, but this zeitgeist in identity that has been cooking for several years now, and I think that now it's the time that we have the mass interesting as well from the government, from people in general, about how do people manage their identity digitally. And on top of that, we also really need it for some additional use cases that are going to come soon. Let me ask you a question, being very straight. Billions, IDOS. Are we competitors?
Well, we don't do the same thing, so I would say no.
But we both do identity.
We both do identity, but as we've discussed, identity is many things. But the cheeky answer to that is that until there is a global market for these types of solutions, we could never compete with each other because we are both competing with obscurity. But more realistically, I think our team focuses on technologies like zero-knowledge proofs. Our team does not store user data or manage or facilitate the KYC process, which is actually a area of expertise for which we are incredibly proud to work alongside you guys and thankful that we do not handle ourselves. And so one of the things that I am very appreciative of and grateful for, having the opportunity to know you for many years, is to rely on IDOS as exemplars of leadership in the KYC space. And so I know we've spent a lot of time thinking about how our piece is put together. Actually, even just earlier today, I was talking to a few of my teammates. So we do not yet have a specific architecture, but we have a few ideas.
Nice, yeah. I mean, I was also talking before about this. Like today, if we make an analogy, it's the internet in 1995 or 96, whatever. none of those companies that were around there, or 99% of them, are not around today either. So actually the ones that emerged, they were the ones that learned from those and then built other companies. And eventually, yes, you get into that stage of competition, but at this point, we need to grow the whole pie. And I think that that's what's important. So you talk about a bit of the focus of IDOS. We focus more on stable coins, so making sure that the stable coins can really reach to real world use cases. That means that data moves at the same speed that money does, and that happens as well in a way that still is privacy preserving, that it takes into account security, decentralization, and making sure that we build systems that are robust for those use cases that are digital. What do you know, or what do you think about stable coins and the impact that they can have in bringing crypto to the mainstream adoption?
I think of stablecoins like digital American Express traveler's checks. Now, I might be aging myself a little bit here, but some of your viewers might remember a time when, if you traveled overseas and you were American, you would receive from American Express these paper checks that were like vouchers that represented US dollars. And they could only be redeemed, they could only be used by the person to whom they were issued. So, representations of US dollars that were backed by a company that could be spent in any environment, regardless of whether or not US dollars were the legal tender in that area. And that's how I think of stablecoins from a digital perspective today. They allow us to extend the power of our currency to any environment, regardless of whether or not our counterparties or even ourselves are part of the traditional financial system. Backed by the technology and security of different companies, just like American Express had back in the day. But now, stablecoins allow us to connect a global financial system not only among individuals and institutions, but even with agent-to-agent payments and the advent of AI.
Mm-hmm. And not many people know this, but actually you worked for a while for Berkshire Hathaway. That was some years ago, but what has changed in finance since then?
Oh, you're blowing up my spot, dude. I used to be a suit. So when I was working at Berkshire Hathaway in beautiful Omaha, Nebraska, the early days of Ethereum were really just taking hold. And so the concept of cryptocurrency was still a foreign idea. Blockchains had not yet come into the mainstream discourse, and the premise that an alternative to banks might exist to facilitate payments, or an alternative to credit cards and physical cash and digital banking was difficult to conceive of. In fact, when I spent a lot of time onboarding my colleagues at Berkshire Hathaway to Coinbase, they were confused, excited, not really sure what to do with this information, but knew that it was going to be big. And in the ensuing years since then, I think not only was Warren Buffett wrong about crypto, but I also think that we've seen a global appetite for more open finance, and that appetite is shared among institutions and individuals.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think is the role of identity in all that, into enabling this change in finance? Do you think is it just an add-on to just KYC verify people, or you think about it as core infrastructure to actually make that change happen?
We cannot facilitate digital payments at scale unless we know who we are paying. And so the development of open finance, the scalability of stablecoins, the promise of agent-to-agent payments, all rest on the success of decentralized identity at scale.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true. It's interesting that there are actually many that it took a little bit longer to see that was the reality. And I think that we experienced a lot of changes in DeFi in the last years, since 2020 when there was DeFi Summer, really the boom that it went forward. But when we look at identity for this type of use cases that touch the financial world, in general, the Web3 space and many of the crypto OGs are not in favor of anything that touches KYC or AML, or it makes people with suits basically be able to work in the space. The reality is that in the last 6 months, almost 1 year, most of the developments and most of the talk that came into the space actually comes from outside inside. So I wanted to ask you, because many people actually sees these KYC AML use cases as surveillance, something that shouldn't happen, something that as companies that we're building in Web3 we should completely push away. What's your opinion?
I think many of the opinions that I've heard that are critical of or actively opposed to regulations like anti-money laundering are ridiculous. What's the alternative? Pro-money laundering? But in all seriousness, the revolutionary dissident culture of early crypto was born out of the 2008 financial crisis in many ways. And disappointment in the failures of traditional financial institutions and the state to protect individual citizens, it's a very emotional topic for a lot of people whose knee-jerk reaction is to hate anything that comes from a place of regulation, because it was those very regulators, those very institutions that harmed a lot of people in the first place. But we live in a society. There are rules. Whether you think the state should be abolished and there should be no laws or not, that's a personal view. But the reality is that guardrails around financial interactions and the responsibility to have those happen in an accountable way, those are not going anywhere. And we can either be active participants in the thoughtful and reasonable development of solutions, or we can sit on our hands and cry about it. And I really prefer not to do the latter.
Yeah, we usually call these don't shoot the messenger, or the people that are actually looking to change these systems to make it work for humans. Stablecoins are also often framed as a bridge to the bank. How do you think about inclusion when serving people without bank accounts or with a formal ID that is issued by their government?
We've already started to see global adoption of crypto technologies and decentralized identity solutions, like the ability to create a crypto wallet from anywhere without asking permission from anyone. So I think that's a really great starting point. Another sort of obvious global trend, especially in marginalized communities, is that the prevalence of mobile devices, of cell phones, is through the roof and growing by the billions. So mobile-first technologies, crypto wallets, and their ease of use, I think, are the key to banking the unbanked. I would also note that this is not just a human problem. AI agents are the largest unbanked population on the internet. And right now they are unidentified as well. So in the same way that we want to scale, digital finance for human beings, we need to be wary of what that means for an agentic world and how we can keep safe our capital and the human beings that we want to welcome into this network with thoughtful architecture.
Your ex-bio says that you're here to save the internet. What does that mean?
I mean, the internet is fucked right now because 50% of online traffic comes from unidentified, unaccountable bots. And accountability requires identity. And so if we want to enable agentic workflows, agent-to-agent payments, AI-enabled interactions at scale, we need to be able to determine who we are dealing with on the internet. Now, tens of billions of dollars are lost every year due to deepfakes, scams, fraud that happens online. And until we have a reasonable way to verify who we're dealing with, to verify the authenticity of data, to verify our money is being sent to the right place, then the internet will no longer be the effective and efficient, promising technical frontier that it has been up to this point. Unless we step in right now the internet is going to go to a very strange place, and I don't know if that is going to be useful for humanity.
I think there's this theory of the dead internet you probably heard about, which I think is not a theory anymore. It's a reality in many platforms. So
Certainly.
definitely. In 3 years, so very long term for Web3 standards, what does success look like for Billions?
3 years from now, we have inverted the internet so that instead of being a general purpose data harvesting layer controlled by advertisers and what's left of your Facebook friends, instead, we will enjoy personalized experiences everywhere we go in a privacy-preserving way built around our traits and preferences and curated for what we are trying to do. 3 years from now, Billions Network will rectify the original sin of the internet, online advertising, as the backbone of all of our experiences. We will no longer need to operate from the assumption that third parties are harvesting data about us, often imprecise, to inform roughly the experiences that we have. We will no longer have to rely on business models that mess with how close you think you are to your friends to get you to buy more stuff. But instead, we will have dynamically generated user interfaces. We will have digital payments and multi-agent workflows that allow us to be served up the types of experiences and information that we want instead of manually typing words into a search bar and crossing our fingers because we feel lucky and we hope we're going to get to the right Wikipedia page.
Beautifully said, and I hope that we reach to that future. Even if it's in 3 years from now, I would take it. Evin, has been a pleasure having you here today. As always, I think you radiate a unique energy that is not common in the identity space. People look at it as something that is more boring. You make it sexy, let me use this word. So I think that it has been great to learn more about what are your views, but just to end up, what is the best way for people to be informed about Billions and the work that you're doing?
Thank you so much. And on that topic, I want to say, I think that identity is perhaps the most exciting, personal, accessible topic in all of technology. Because every single human being on Earth has had an identity since the day they were born. They never had to ask permission to be themselves, and I think that the way we build the future of the internet should mirror that reality. Now, if you want to follow along with what we're up to at Billions Network, you can always find us on X, formerly known as Twitter. Again, identity change. But you can find Billions Network on X at billions_NTWK or billions.network if you want to get started exploring our toolset or experiencing it for yourself. If you want to try out our native application and see what it feels like to generate zero-knowledge proofs or to retrieve data from something like your passport and be able to represent things about yourself without oversharing, you can check out the app or Android store for your mobile device around the world. Download the Billions application. I'm also always on X at Proven Authority, and my DMs are always open.
Evin, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, sir. Always a pleasure. I really appreciate the thoughtful questions. This was really fun, and we'll see you on chain.
Likewise, see you around.